This class is the advanced class, and here we would probably like to drill a little bit deeper than, for example, what should I do against the exchange French, but what are like the motivations for picking up a specific line. And one of the, let's say, awkward lines that I have is I'm a big D4 player. I like to play D4. I find it easier to control the outcome of the opening with D4. Whereas with E4, I find that across the board, there's a wider berth, if you will, for black. So for example, when I was growing up as a kid, it was like E4 was best by test, according to Bobby Fischer. And like just everybody, and I mean just everybody in those days played E5. It wasn't even close. If you look at the ECOs, the Encyclopedia of Chess Openings, I think they're, gosh, they could be up to edition 5. But the ECO, the original ECO edition number 1 for E4, E5 was by far the fattest edition. I mean, it was like, man, D4, C4, knight F3. It had nothing next to the E4, E5 encyclopedia. By the time we got out to the late 1990s, E4, C5 ECO had expanded by about 300 pages. It was sort of like the Sicilian, which is a kind of a flank opening, if you will, just expanded the ECO enormously. Let's go back to D4 for a moment. So we go back to D4 for a moment, and well, what flank move can there be? Well, we know there's the Grunfeld, the King's Indian, and of course the Dutch. But the Dutch never, literally from the time 1970s till today, the time that I started chess, the Dutch never was really properly endorsed. Periodically, people like Nigel Short, Hikaru Nakamura, maybe Veselin Topalov, even an Alexander Shabalov played the Dutch, but it never really caught on. So the ECO never really expanded in the Dutch. So essentially against D4, the major move, of course, is D5, the classical queen pawn. After D5, C4, C6, the Slav and the semi-Slav became everybody's favorite weapon. Like, I mean, just like everybody, just all the top players from Garry Kasparov on down started playing the Slav, Kramnik, so on and so forth. Everybody plays the Slav. Okay, so in the normal Slav, everybody plays takes on C4, A4, bishop F5, E3, and we have what we might call the Slav position, or the Slav. Then everybody, just everybody, started playing the semi-Slav, E7, E6, and massive expansion of the ECO thanks to this position. Two major branches. Bishop G5 takes on C4, E4, B5, E5, led to what became known, or is known, as the Botvinnik pawn sacrifice. That line of play includes A7, H6, pardon me, bishop H4, G5, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, knight here, G3, bishop here, queen here, and we haven't even got to the starting position yet. I mean, there's just massive reams and reams of games that happened here. That is the first branch, Then we get to what is become known as the Moscow variation of the semi-Slav, and that goes bishop g5, not takes on c4, but h6. It was this line of play for black that, stop. Stop. e4, that Vishwanathan Anand in Bonn, what was it, 2007? Yeah. 2007? Bonn, 2007. Vishy won, essentially, he won that world championship match with the black pieces. And this line, so in the Botvinnik, pawn sacrifice, black sacrifice of pawns, and this Moscow variation, white sacrifice of pawn, massive, massive increase of the ECO Encyclopedia of Chess openings, thanks to this very, very, very popular line of play. d4. So what I wanted to show is a move I think is very, very popular at the club levels, and what I thought, or maybe I still think about it, I think is a proper antidote. Amateur players and professionals alike, we do like gambits. We like gambits a lot. Gambits are great fun. They put pressure on both the opponent, the player who's gambiting, the one who's receiving the material. And I've always liked the Budapest Gambit. And I have seen it in amateur play for my entire career. Yeah. And it's a very intriguing line, because it immediately challenges white. Okay, you know, you've played c4, you've played d4, and, you know, black isn't supposed to be able to play this move, right? I mean, hey, that's a pawn, that's a pawn, that's a pawn. So, if white plays any move other than taking the pawn on e5, he has no chance for advantage. For example, a move like d5, already I think black has close to a superior game after the move bishop c5. I really like black's position here very much. I think this is an excellent bishop on c5, and I think black is ready to play d7, d6, and c7, c6 with a very good game. So after e5, essentially the only move is takes. New variation, we're going to play knight here, and we get this position. Now, one of the key supporters, if you will, of the Budapest Gambit is a guy, Peter Svidler. Okay? And Peter Svidler, he was playing a very, very crucial game against Vladimir Kramnik. I think this was kind of like a Soviet Russian championship game. And Vladimir Kramnik as white in this position, and I think that this position has been played thousands of times in amateur play, played a move I've never considered with white. Never considered this move at all with white. Someone want to take a guess?
e4.
That's a very reasonable move, and it has been played countless times. e4 is a very standard mainline move. That wasn't. f3 is a terrible move. Queen d4 is a bad move. Pardon? Queen, well, no. So the standard moves for white. White has played knight c3. White has played knight f3. White has played bishop f4. This is considered the best move, by the way, bishop f4. White has played e4. with the idea after knight takes e5 to play f4, knight back, bishop here. There's a whole line of play that goes from this position. Kramnik played a move, really remarkable move. I mean, knight h3, what the heck is that? I mean, that violates so many principles, it's not even close. And this is a top Russian championship game going on here. What the heck was the idea of knight h3? Simply put, as Peter Svidler himself explained, one of the great proponents again of the Budapest, it was that after here, what he felt was that White's plan is to put a knight here, and eventually to put a knight on this square. And this was a really undermining move of the Budapest. Let me explain. Against knight f3, it is considered proper by black to play bishop c5, threatening the pawn on f2, provoking the move e3, knight c6, knight c3, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop e2. Okay? So this is considered a very standard line of play. Now, the most remarkable thing about this line of play is how play proceeds from here. White's knight is one day going to come to this d5 square. So it's considered normal for black to play moves like d6 and bishop e6, and sometimes to capture that knight. Black might also pay some attention to the move knight e4. Okay? So after this, black comes up with the most remarkable plan you've ever seen. A plan right out of my beginner days. What black plays is rook e8, b2, b3. This move we absolutely understand. This bishop on c1 is passively placed behind the e3 pawn. White conceives a plan of putting his bishop on b2, the long diagonal. Once he plays knight d5, this bishop is beautiful. Black plays, are you ready for this? a5. What? Bishop b2, rook a6. Yes! 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 Do you know the name of Mamidarov? Shak Mamidarov. He just won the major tournament in Beijing, and he has played numerous times this position with black. And what Shak's idea is we're just going to go back a move or two. And we're going to ask a question of black's position. You know, it's like, you know, chess is a team sport, and when you play in a professional league, everybody gets paid to play. You know, even if you're riding the pine, you get paid to just ride the bench. So in this position, one question that black has to ask himself is, what am I going to do with the bishop? What am I going to do with the rook? What am I doing with my queen? So for example, if black conceives the play of d7, d6, very clever, bishop e6, excellent move, queen d7, very good, bravo, connecting the rooks. The rook comes to d8, and then. When you play the move d7, d6, you must be aware that the move knight a4 will cost you your two bishops. Yes? When you've played all of those moves I've just described, the rook on a8 really isn't earning its pay. It's not. So now let's just see what happens. After the move a5, bishop b2, rook a6, knight d5, rook h6. So what Mamidarov's idea is this rook might look stupid, bad, misplaced. Well, I don't even know how to describe it. But it is annoying. It's far more annoying for white than the rook on a8. White is now observing that there's potential of moves like queen h4. If this pawn is ever provoked to the square h3, this bishop stands ready in time with the move d7, d6 to sacrifice itself. Okay. Stop and freeze that for a second. What has happened is there's been a trade of knights. Okay? Anybody has heard of Mark Dvoretsky? Mark Dvoretsky, considered one of the world's foremost trainers. Okay, Mark Dvoretsky devotes entire chapters to his series of training books to what he calls the superfluous knight. So the idea of the superfluous knight is simply that in certain types of positions, one player has a knight too many. This is one of those positions. So here, what we're going to do is try to understand the difference. Knight h3, knight e5, e3. Now, when you play the move knight c6, very normal move, knight f4, as Peter Svidler experienced, the first part is notice that these knights mutually protect one another. They, in a sense, step on one another's hooves. Okay? This knight, when it's been traded for this knight on b1, as we saw a moment ago in that variation, where black played a5, rook here, the rook got a chance to jump from a8 to h6. Thanks to the fact that this knight is now in the way, there's no such maneuver. Very, very interesting. So I just point out knight h3. I wrote an article in Inside Chess Magazine as an homage to honor Bobby Fischer. Bobby Fischer wrote A Bust to the King's Gambit. Do you remember that article? A Bust to the King's Gambit. And he had this great line in his article. So he, a win after win after win after win after win for black. And then his conclusion of the article was, and if white plays differently, he loses differently. So a great line. I just love that line. So I wrote a bust to the Budapest Gambit with the line, and if black plays differently, he loses differently. Okay, I think that bishop f4 is the best move, and it's certainly the most challenging. Maybe in the 23rd century, people will play moves like knight h3, and they'll be understood as the best move in the position. I'm still in the 21st century, so I don't understand knight h3. Okay, bishop f4. The very, very standard move is knight c6. Black wants to win this pawn on e5 back, and I understand him. Knight f3. Bishop b4, check. Considered the best move. Knight c3 is standard. Akiba Rubinstein, the great Akiba Rubinstein, he preferred knight bd2 because he was a very simple fellow and he liked the two bishops. This actually happened in a tournament game that I was a witness to. It happened right next to me. Queen e7 is the standard move. a2, a3. My friend, Dr. David Leo Stefarak, was on the white side of, was on the black side of this when this had been played, and sure enough, white captured the bishop. These were expert players.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think somebody lost rating points, but there was no revocation of the title. So this should be a pattern that everybody knows. Iris, do you know what you would do if you were black? What? Checkmate, right? Smothered checkmate. This really happened. And I recall the kind of flourish that Leo gave to the move. It was sort of like, you know. Okay, of course, Akiba Rubinstein did not allow the smothered mate, but instead played the move e3, obviously. His opponent would take, castles, bishop e2, d6, and the players would just play this position. Modern grandmasters do appreciate the two bishops, but they don't think that white's advantage is significant, rather quite minuscule here. They don't think that this is an issue for the Budapest, and I tend to agree. Or rather, put another way, I do agree. Knight c3. This is the main move and is featured in my Bust to the King's Gambit. New mainline, yes. Now here there's a school of thought that says black has two moves. He can choose between queen e7 and bishop takes c3. I disagree. Black cannot play the move queen e7. In the first place, if you play the move queen e7, you give white the option of a much better variation of Rubinstein's play. It's the very same position as before. Remember when I won the two bishops? But here, the rook is actually far more well placed on c3 than that queen was on d2. Here, obviously, white has an immediate killing threat. Bishop takes e5. In certain variations, for example, like d7, d6, white could play the move c5. With the move c5, white is trying to create a target by making a weak pawn on d6. Obviously, black cannot take the pawn because this wins. Okay, so that's all very clear. So the move queen e7 gives white this option of rook c1, and he shouldn't be given this option. Queen e7 also gives white a different option, and that is the move queen b3. Okay, you cannot capture this pawn twice because this bishop would then lack protection. Black cannot capture this knight because then after queen takes, this pawn is hanging. Black cannot play the move bishop c5 because after e3, knight takes e5, knight d5 is just not very nice. Okay, this is just a very pleasant position for the first player. If you play knight here, knight a5, queen c2, knight takes c4. In the words of Nikolai Menev, you will die with a full stomach. a3, bishop here, pawn here, knight takes, knight d5. Once again, gets you into a world of trouble. This is not what you want to do with black. So, in this position, after bishop b4 check, knight c3, don't play the move queen e7 if you want to play the gambit, but take first on c3 and now play queen e7. Now, in the history, there's been many wonderful games from this position. In particular, what was particularly striking were the games of Svetozar Gligoric. Gligoric pounded the Budapest. I mean, it was really terrible what he did to the Budapest. And Gligoric's favorite move was the move queen d5. And he had a number of victories, just like just blood-curdling victories in this line of play. And for some reason, don't ask me why. I mean, there was like a line of customers that just lined up to lose as black. Like, next, okay, punch your ticket, next, you're out of here. And he was just killing people. So black players woke up and they did not play queen a3. They didn't go queen a3, rook here, and took this pawn. Instead, they accepted the gambit, the loss of the pawn, and played the move f7, f6. Sorry, I wanted to emphasize that in this position, white has the strategical threat of h3, driving this knight to this pathetic square, playing e4, and it's over. So f6 is basically, oops, that wasn't right. f6 is basically only move, main move, takes, queen takes, oops, wrong, blunder, sorry. Knight takes, new main line. Now here, Glegerich played a lot of different moves, but queen d3, main line move, d7, d6. And here, Glegerich did some interesting things with e3, bishop e2. He would also experiment with knight d2. I played the move g3, and I won numerous games with g3. So this is basically my bus to the Budapest. If at the club there are some members who play the Budapest Gambit, you can just nail them to a holy cross the next time they play the Budapest Gambit by playing g3. Okay, at this point, basically black is left with two moves. Either he can play the move knight e5, knight takes, d takes, bishop here, and have no compensation, or he could play the move castles. Most of my opponents who have gotten into this position have chosen the latter. Castles, bishop g2. Now, what's the big deal about g3? Twofold. First and foremost, with the move g3, I protected the bishop. That means that any jumps by the knight, discovered attacks against the bishop, well, I've already got that fellow covered. That's point number one. The second is that this bishop on f1 wasn't any great shakes. There was a pawn on e2, there's a pawn on c4. Now that bishop on g2, it's looking real good. I'm going to castle, my king is going to be safely tucked behind the bishop, and this bishop on this long diagonal, eyeballing this pawn over here. My opponents have played the move knight e4 against me. Yes, I have castled. And now here, unfortunately, a few of them have lost on the move. They have played the move bishop f5, considering that their position is really good and that they were going to make a discovered attack against my queen, and all sorts of bad things were going to they were going to do all sorts of bad things to me. But after the move knight h4, it's like it's oopsie daisy. Black is in bad shape. There's no really good discoverers. Knight takes g3. Thank you very much. I take the knight. The knight can't move because knight takes f5 is coming with a tempo. I am threatening knight takes f5, bishop e4. I think, if I remember well, I think my opponents have played against me rook a e8, and I have played this cute little move, c5. So in the first place, I'm getting rid of my double pawns. In the second place, I'm setting up for ideas like queen d5 check. I'm setting up for ideas like, okay, d takes c5, takes a pawn. So this position I have won routinely. So the best move in the position is this move, knight c5. New variation, queen e3. Okay, So all of these moves are basically forced. This whole line of play of the Budapest Gambit. Bishop e6, trying to win this pawn on c4. Knight d4, very nice. Bishop takes here. Knight takes here. Queen takes. Bishop takes. All of these moves are forced.
Oh.
And we get to this ending. This whole line of play was all forced, and I have won this ending on several occasions. It's like the same ending, the same position. It was just like this whole series of moves. And essentially, what we can see, obviously, is I'm getting a 4-2 majority, a 3-2 majority for black, but in the rook and bishop, the dynamic play that black has. Black usually plays for these lines of play, rook there and rook there. My kingside majority easily overwhelms black's queenside. So we usually have a game that goes like this, and are you ready for it? Turn your eyes. Small children, don't look, don't look, don't look. Black reasons. Rook takes a2, rook takes a2, bishop takes a2, rook here, rook takes. I can't take the pawn with the rook. I'll take the pawn with the... Yes. And now... Ah! Rook takes, rook takes. Yeah. And again, I've won this ending, including just like this. And my opponents weren't experts either. You know, they didn't lose their titles. I won't tell you how well titled they were. But this line of play against the Budapest Gambit, to my mind, really puts the kibosh on the Budapest.